Um, First off, I just want to maybe get a little house cleaning items myself out of the way. This presentation is for informational purposes. I am not an attorney. I don't play one on TV. I don't have any, I'm probably going to be saying some things that cross the realm of, could possibly be taken as advice for you to implement in your companies, but I just want to make sure that you check with your own employment law attorney before you start implementing any of the suggestions that I have here, or you can talk to us and we have people that can help you with that too, so that are legally responsible for those types of things. So another kind of house cleaning item before we get started, I guess. I just want to go over some of the learning objectives. First of all, the title of this webinar, if some of you are looking for, Wild Kingdom or animals in the Wild Kingdom or something like that, you're in the wrong place. So we are talking about best practices for background screening and a Taleo integration. So if you're not here for that, you can go ahead and hang up. This webinar is, it's obviously in a webinar format and should last about an hour. So we will go with that. Some of the learning objectives that you'll be taking away from this. One other thing that I didn't mention, I'll have some slides at the end. I'm not sure how advertised this was, but this presentation does qualify you for continuing education credits for SHRM and also for, I believe it's HCRI. I have the slides at the end, so you might want to stick around for the whole presentation if you really would like to get those credits. It is something that this presentation is approved for, and we can get you information about that on the back end. So, but just wanted to throw that out there as well. Before we go on again, I just want to list and talk about some of the learning objectives. I understand that many of you may already know why it's important to screen and are probably already doing background screening, but I also wanted to go over a few slides, talk about some recent things that give us even a better reason of why we should be background screening. So my intent is not to try to coerce you to screen, because I understand many of you may already know this, but there are some interesting statistics that we can talk about that will give you some ammunition for things in your screening process. So that's what I'm going to talk about first. Then we'll talk about some of the trends that are influencing the pre-employment screening. Some of those trends affect laws. Some of them are litigation. We'll go over some of those and some of the best practices. And then on the third one, we'll kind of dive into some of the meat a little bit, discovering how we can apply some of those laws, the best practices, when using background checks in the hiring process and making decisions. Certain decision points. There's timelines within decisions. We'll talk about some of those types of things. And then at the end, since this is a Taleo presentation, we'll review some of the critical documentation and some of the best practices that are associated with the Oracle validated integration, which increases the speed of your integration and ensures smooth transition for the background screening. So we'll talk about some of those types of things. All right, then we'll just move along on to our first discussion item about why it's important to screen. There are a number of reasons, but I've just picked out a few of these that make sense, and many of you may already be aware of these or had issues with this, which actually just kind of solidify these things. First off, when you do background screening or pre-employment screening, it boosts the productivity of all of your employers or all of your employees. So it kind of helps that they have a understanding that the person sitting next to them, has been screened, and then also the people that are there are all have been screened. It boosts productivity all around. It also lowers the turnover rates. When you have good people in seats, people that you've done a thorough screen on, obviously your attrition rates are going to be better, and you're going to be able to keep those people around for longer. So that's another really important reason why background screening is important. Another big one is reducing employee theft. We all know that there's a theft problem that goes around if people have access to cash tills, even that if it's an office environment. You know, we've had situations with customers calling us to actually implement background screening because of an employee theft. And it wasn't something where money was missing from the till, it was something where tools were being stolen off the construction site, or, you know, office supplies out of the supply closet or something like that. So that's another important one that I think that we need to look at as far as why it's important to screen. And then we come to what all HR people are interested in. Well, I guess all of these are things you want to be interested in, but reducing training costs. You know, it costs a tremendous amount of money to bring someone on, train them, get them up and running up to speed, and then, you know, they're out of there because who knows what the reason is, but they don't work out, they don't stick around, and so it actually reduces the training costs for employers. The next one is reducing the negligent hiring liability, and that's a big one and something that we'll probably talk a little bit more about in the presentation, about how you can reduce that and some ways that you can really put some policies and procedures in place that will help that. It's a very litigious culture right now. I'm going to go over some of that as well, some of the things that are happening in from regulatory agencies to third-party litigators out there, employees and plaintiffs' bars that are out there actually looking for employers to make mistakes in their hiring process. So that's a big one right now, and I have a couple of stories I think you might be interested in when we get to that point about some of those things that are going on. And then finally, just to reduce the overall workplace violence. I'm going to go over a slide later that talks about some of the workplace violence, and some of the numbers are staggering about, you know, things that are happening, violence is happening while on the job. So those are some things that I think are important to look at when we're talking about why we want to screen, why we want to do background checks, why we want to check someone's you know, history, any type of employment screening, pre-employment screening that you want to do. So another great reason to screen is just looking at some of these numbers. If we took, and this is a broader scope than just my organization, but our numbers fall in line with these pretty closely with these numbers here. So 45% of all resumes contain a major fabrication, and 33% of employees admit to stealing, and this is based on the last 3 years. And then 18% of all violent crimes do take place at work. And so those are some pretty staggering statistics, and it's important to know some of these things because screening is important. Even if it's not an incentive for you guys to start screening, it's an incentive for you guys to continue screening and doing things so that you can have a better workforce. Another kind of thing that I thought was interesting that I pulled together is that on the litigation side of it, $40 million was one of the top awards in history, and that was for negligent hiring case. So, and I can share more information about that with you guys to give you specifics on that case if you want, but it's very staggering that these things are happening for negligent hiring. So 30% of small businesses failure is caused by employee theft, and I know a lot of enterprise businesses aren't missing a lot of some of these things that are going out, but it does cost money. So it may not fail a larger or a mid-sized company, but it's just an interesting statistic I thought that I'd throw in there, that small businesses, and maybe there are some on here that have small businesses, but you know, their failure is actually caused by employee theft. So it does have a significant impact on business, and I think that's important to look at. One of the other things is that the 1 to 5 times is the cost to replace a bad hire. So those things are really important to look at, and it's something that, again, is a incentive for us to be doing some background screening. Here's the thing I was talking about before, was with the workplace violence. An estimated 8% of rapes, 7% of robberies, and 16% of assaults actually occurred while victims were working or were on duty. So, and this presentation is not meant to be a scare tactic or anything like that, but some of these statistics, they're real, and it's very important to look at that. And if you're a hiring manager and you're working in this environment, then these things are important to know about. So, and then just on a broader scale, nearly 1 million people are victimized by violent crime while they're at work. So this just kind of results in, as I throw up these numbers here, the type of crime. People are actually victimized by these crimes, and those are the numbers. And this is over a period of, I believe 3 years. Oh no, that's in 1 year. So this is from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. So there's also victimizations, and then there's also real injuries that happen to these people. So it is hurting people. Not only are they victimized or have trauma, but there's real real injuries that happen in the cases of these crimes as they're listed down the side there. On the bottom, I just want to read this because I think it's important. In today's litigious culture, which it is a very litigious culture, you can't afford to hire employees who will put your company at risk. Employers can and are being held legally responsible for the wrongful acts of employees, and courts have established that it's an employer's duty to conduct a thorough background check of all potential employees. So it is important to do your background screening. One last slide here, just kind of to talk about that, and I pulled some of these from the media. I just went out on some random sites and found some of this information. The Wall Street Journal reported that 34% of application forms contain outright lies about experience. And, you know, this is real. We find it in our company all the time. This is one of the biggest discrepancies is on the resumes where they're doing previous employers. We've found a situation where this person had actually put on his resume that he was the CEO of one of the companies he was hiring for. So, I mean, it's kind of a funny example. It wasn't the actual company he was hiring for. It was like a sister company or like the main corporation. He had said he was the CEO of that. Obviously, he didn't get the job because he never was the CEO of that company. So we had another situation where a person put on their resume, and we verified on the resume that they had put that they were HVAC certified, and then when we called some of the employers, they said he never did that work. Well, the employer actually hired the person anyway, and one of the first questions he asked his hiring manager when he got out on the job was what HVAC meant. And so I think that's kind of ironic that on his resume he's putting that he's HVAC certified, but you know, there's nothing really to say that he really knows what it means. So it's important to check those things out thoroughly and kind of know, because that does cost employers a lot of money. Another one I found on NBC News, and this goes right in line with our error rate on our database, because we actually do provide this product through our company. So national criminal databases have a 41% error rate, and they're very inexpensive, but they're also very incomplete. And later on in the presentation, I'll kind of talk about where there is a need or a use for this type of information. But the problem is we run up against companies where we're selling against a national criminal database where maybe one of our competitors has said, well, this is a national database, you get everything on the person based off this database search, when really it's a little bit oversold as something greater than it is. So I just want to be honest about that. Those national databases, yes, they're inexpensive, but they aren't a end-all, be-all, the greatest thing in the world to catch a criminal. And I'm sure a lot of you already understand that. But the 41% error rate is in line almost exactly with what our error rate is on those things. So that's something important to look at as well. And then from Business Week, finally, 16% of executive resumes. So those of you who are hiring for executive positions, a lot of those contain false academic claims, and many times the executive searches are ones you want to check the best. You're putting this person in a position in your company, and regardless of what they've done in the past, or what they said they've done in the past, it might be a good idea to really check those things out. So anyway, that kind of gives you a wrap-up on why it's important to screen. And maybe some of this is old news to some of you, but it's also something that's important to look at and be refreshed on as you go out throughout the hiring process. What I want to do now is kind of switch gears, and I feel like I'm talking really fast. I know that there's no interaction here, but you will have a chance to ask questions, and feel free to ask questions. And if we have some time at the end, I will get to those. And then if not, we will be able to get those answered to you via email. So just throwing that out there. But again, I'm going to switch gears here and talk about some of the trends that are shaping the best practices in our industry. And it's a very compliance-oriented landscape as far as hiring, that, but then when it comes to background screening, it even gets a little bit more focused in. There are several regulatory agencies that regulate our industry, the CRA industry, consumer reporting industry, which is what we are. There's the EEOC, which is a regulatory agency, or they're putting out decisions and going after companies all over the place right now. An interesting side note to that, I was in Washington, D.C. Last year, and the head of the EEOC was there, the highest person at the agency of the EEOC was there and spoke to us and basically told us that they were out to find employers that were violating laws, that were being discriminatory in their hiring practices, and it's a very large source of revenue for them. And I'll go over a slide a little bit later that talks about that. But it was a real life example to me that I was sitting in a meeting with this person that is at a government agency, the highest person, I guess next to the President of the United States, but they're basically on a hunt to get businesses so that they can grow their revenue. So that's an important thing. The FCRA is a law that was passed, Fair Credit Reporting Act, which governs us. There's a lot of negligent hiring, there's litigation, lawsuits, risk management, all those types of things are the trends which are shaping this. Some of you may have heard of the ban the box. I'm going to talk a little about that too. There's a lot of states that are actually adopting this, and we say, yes, ban the box, that's old news. But the reason I bring it up is it started a while ago, but it's actually gaining a lot of momentum. So nationwide, there's over 100 cities and counties that have actually adopted this. So we were generally seeing it on a state level or a national level where we would see these ban the box things, but now they're starting to go into very specific areas in San Francisco, some of these different areas that are actually being very specific about the timing of when you can offer the job application or when you can do a background check or when you can even ask them about a background check. It has to be, a certain time during the screening process, and each one of these laws have different varying time frames and very specific differentiating criteria for when you can make those decisions in those certain areas. So if you're hiring across the board in all different areas, these things are very important to know about, and it's important to be up to date on those kinds of things. So just as a general statement, I know there were a couple that just came through recently that I got emails on as recent as last week, some of these things, but the employment laws are becoming more fragmented. New Hampshire House Bill. These are actually states where cities or counties have actually banned the box. So it kind of gives you an idea of that. They're called different things. You may have them as negligent Tennessee negligent and retention law. I know that some of them are calling them by different names. They have them as a fair chance ordinance, which is in San Francisco. California put in place one recently. Illinois approved it. New Jersey passed one, and it's called the Opportunity to Compete Act. So they come in different names. Delaware passed one. I'm trying to see what the name of that one was, but they come in different names, but basically they are forms of this ban the box thing, and it's something that is growing in momentum throughout the country. So it's just something to be aware of and something to know about. One thing that's also important to note as far as litigation goes, there's a lot of litigation surrounding no harm FCRA lawsuits. Now, what does that mean? We just had a ruling on some of the litigation that's come out recently where, you know, there are lawsuits against companies and also against companies like mine, CRAs, for actually violating the FCRA. So there's no harm to the actual individual. In fact, in one case, and fortunately I think it was ruled in our favor where they, especially I believe this was on the Spokio case, but they're actually going after companies where they're saying you're in violation of a law even though you didn't know about the law or you technically violated this law, so we're going to penalize you, even when the applicant for the job or applicant for the you know, the apartment or whatever, they weren't hurt at all. There was no, in fact, one situation I believe that brought this up to play was for a tenant screening where the person was, they reported false information on him, but the information that was reported actually helped him. So it actually said that he made more than he made. It actually gave him a better report than it actually was. But because the information was wrong, they're starting to do these no-harm lawsuits, which I think is kind of a bad deal because even though no one was harmed in the process and nothing came of it, there's a lot of litigation surrounding that. So that's something to kind of look forward to as well. That's something that's rising and a trend that's happening. One of the other trends that we've been seeing is when selecting background screening companies or doing it yourself, companies want to partner with a company or to actually have processes in place and to have certifications on certain things. They want them to be privacy certified. They want their technology to have protocols in place so that when they come up with PII and information that they're PII compliant, that they aren't passing any information that would get through to anyone else. All the security protocols are in place. And then when dealing with the aftermath of the background screen on adjudication, things like that, make sure that processes are in place. Do they have a certification through ISO 9001 that actually proves? Are there internal audits that are in play that help direct these companies to be better? And, you know, are they accredited? Is there an industry association that they're associated with that has an accreditation program? Those are the types of things that companies are looking for now to make sure that they're dealing with a company that handles these things properly. The other trends that I think is really important to companies out there is that the candidate experience. What is the candidate experience like? We really want, once we hire an employee, we want to take care of that employee, but companies now are looking at, we want to take care of our candidates. We not only want to take care of them while they're our employee, but we want to put off a good image before they're hired here. We want them to come to us. We don't want to have them waiting or going through some laborious application process or background screening process that's going to hold up their hiring date, and then they go find a job somewhere else with one of our competitors. So we're really starting to see that the applicant experience and candidate experience is very, very integrated with the hiring process as far as the background screening goes too. So that's one of those. So now I'm going to shift gears here and kind of talk about some of the meat of the presentation. And it looks like we're about halfway through. So, but I am going to talk about some of the laws that are impacting background screening. I'm just going to generally brief over those, but then maybe go into some of the best practices. So there are consumer protection and privacy laws, obviously, which affect background screening. And some of those are the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which I talked about. And again, even if you guys aren't running credit reports on someone, if you are compiling a consumer report, you are bound by the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So if you're compiling information about an individual that you're going to hire and putting it in one place, or you're going outside to an outside agency and compiling information about somebody's criminal history or their background or anything like that, you automatically become associated with the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So that's important to know. There's also the Gramm-Leach-Bailey Act, some call it the GLAB. That also comes into play when you're doing credit header data and you know, information on finding out where people live. There's the FERPA Act that comes into play with background screening. There's also, if you're doing tenant screening, I'm not sure how many people on here do tenant screening or have properties, but there's the Fair Housing Act, which comes into play. There's also a lot of state regulations that come into play. And I just want to note that these supersede the EEOC restrictions. So if the state has a restriction that is actually stronger or more detailed than the EEOC restrictions, then you need to go by that state's laws. And there's state-specific consumer reporting rules. There's state-specific credit reporting rules, and you know, not in all 50 states, but there are certain states that have written their own state their state FCRA basically. There's state-specific consumer reporting or criminal reporting rules. There's state-specific driving record rules. And then finally, there's also educated employment history rules that are specific to states. On another note, there's employment laws that come into play. So some of those laws are the Americans with Disability Acts, the ADA. A lot of you know about that. And that comes into play with drug testing too. So, you know, when you're doing a drug test on an employee, you can't, as an employer, ask them what medications they're on, so you need to use an MRO. Those types of things come into play when you're doing background checks, drug screening, these types of things. There's the Equal Opportunity Act. Some people refer to that as the Civil Rights Act of 1968. So there's discrimination, things like that when you're hiring, on background screening, all of that kind of stuff comes into play. There are some other laws too that affect background screening. There's driving record regulations, which is the DPPA. There's identity regulations, the USA Patriot Act. I-9 form regulations, which is actually a post-hire activity, but it also is something that there's regulations on how you can collect that information, how you're supposed to get it, how you're, you know, waiting periods of what you're supposed to do if you get a tentative non-confirmation, all of those types of things. And then there's also drug screening regulations, which of course is the DOT rule, 49 CFR Part 40. So those types of things are very important to be aware of when you're doing background screening. The other thing I wanted to talk about, I told you before about the EEOC. I'm just going to throw up a chart here. But this is kind of changing gears, but it gives you an idea of where they are going after companies to find information on discrimination. And among the charges that the EEOC received in the most recent update, the percentage of charges that alleged retaliation is the highest at a 42.8%. The percentage of charges that alleged race discrimination is up there at 35%, which is the next one, which is a big one. And just to give you an idea, I'm not going after government here. I'm not trying to say that they're all bad or whatever, but it's just interesting to me how they're a little bit, in my opinion, reckless on how these things. And I want to just jump off base here to tell you a quick story. We had a client that actually had the EEOC come to them and say, this person you actually discriminated against, we're filing an investigation against you, we're going to come in and investigate you. They sent people in to do an investigation. So they came to us to ask us for some help. Well, we jumped in, looked at the file, looked at the actual record, and we reported the record on this criminal record to the, and it was a woman, and she was a minority, and we actually applied the exact rules that the EEOC suggested to make sure that this person, you know, was not eligible for the position. And some of those include, you know, consider the time since the crime, consider how many offenses there are, consider, you know, if it's relevant to the job. And just to be honest with you, you know, one of the charges was 6 months ago, so I mean it was very recent. There were several charges, and some of them were back, you know, before, like 10, 11, 12 years ago. But because there were a lot of them, you know, we considered those things. And then we looked at the scope of it. It was an aggravated assault against someone, and so she was going to be put in a situation where she was around other people. So we considered all of those things that the EEOC recommends that you look at to make a hiring decision on a applicant. And it was just mind-boggling to me that they came in and filed this investigation against our client. So we wrote back a letter and said, here are your recommendations that we comply with. We did every single one of these, and we sent the letter back to the EEOC, and they actually dropped the investigation and said, okay, we're out of here. You guys did the right thing. The point I want to make here is that my client had to spend $15,000 to $18,000 to have their lawyers come in, have some outside people, do some work with us to find out and prove that they were in compliance with what happened here. So the recklessness of this comes in them just going out, finding a complaint from someone, and then just without doing any investigation beforehand, just going and filing this complaint against the company, having them have to spend their resources and their time to put together a defense, and then just say, oh, okay, all right, we'll drop it, see you later. So the bottom line is it's really important to take care of these things on the front end so that you can actually defend those up front, but more importantly, not get into hot water by applying the criteria before the actual situation comes down, so you're not scrambling to find that information. So I know kind of a long tangent, but I thought it was important to kind of show you a personal experience of what we had that gave us some information, some very important insight into this very thing. So as I go down the line, sex discrimination, 29.3, disability, 28, age discrimination, and then it kind of tapers off from there, national origin, color, equal pay. So, but I guess my point of bringing up this slide is to show that the EEOC is out there filing complaints, and in fact, the thing I think I saw that they jumped in their fines by several $1 million in their revenue over the last couple years, and they're finding that this is a source of revenue for them, so they're going after companies. So just keep that in mind, and we'll move on from this slide. I know it's been a long time, but something I want to kind of get into now is the best practice standards. Like I said before, you want to comply with the EEOC guidance. They give guidance, and that's the reason they give it, so that we can follow it. That does limit your liability under Title VII. So, you know, any anti-discrimination that may be perceived as to be handled, that takes care of that. You also want to comply very strictly with the FCRA. That's an important one to do, and this will minimize the risk from hiring an unfit employee. So again, what is the best search? How do we do a background check, and where is the best search? First of all, you're going to want to determine where and how to search. I know that this is not an exact science. I know that a lot of times with the CSI movies and Jason Bourne, people think, they're flipping through these futuristic screens, pulling up things, flipping around, getting all this information on a person. Well, in the real world, that just doesn't exist, and it's not an exact science, and I just want to bring that up. So it is a human process, and there's no one place that you can go to get criminal information on somebody. There are hundreds of jurisdictions that you can look. They may have lived in different areas, so it's just not an exact science. There is a possibility of misrecords or false positives. It's possible for someone to have the same exact name and the same exact birth date and have a criminal record. It's not very common, but it does happen, and the process is subject to human error. And that, like I said before, there's a lot of myths surrounding background screening, that there is one place to go for all criminal records, that this national 50-state database will pull everything and anything and everything on an individual, and that just simply isn't the case. So that's important to know going into this. So the other best practice is to kind of find your cost versus your tolerance. What is your reason for screening? Why are you going to be doing background checks? What is the purpose of the job? Am I exercising a due diligence to decrease the chance of being found negligent? Or am I only doing a minimum screen because I have a lot of cost restraints? And if you're in a situation where you're running a call center and there's not a huge liability risk, if someone, where someone's operating a forklift or something and can run it through a wall and kill some people, that's a little bit different than a call center where all they have is a telephone. I have heard of people beating someone with a telephone, and that is something that I guess we could be aware of, but it's really not a huge risk when they have opportunity to do it in another way. So those are just some examples of what it is that you're looking for, what your reason is for screening. Performing a huge search, which is a comprehensive search, does eliminate a lot of problems, though, especially when the risk is high on the job. And so the best gold standard screen is to retrieve the records by hand from a county courthouse, to do a 7-year scope, search all counties that this person has lived in, where they've lived, where they've worked, where they've gone to school, any possible touch counties, and then do a national database search as kind of a follow-up. So that's the recommended gold standard search, so that you may catch counties that he may have lived or may have been or visited in that he may have committed a crime in, but maybe he didn't live, work, or go to school there. He could have been visiting and committed a crime. So those are casting a broader net out there with that national database search. Some of the other considerations I want to sort of touch about are falsified previous address and employers. A lot of times they'll put falsified addresses on their resumes. So that's why we recommend looking at the person search or the Social Security screen to find out where they have lived, so that we don't check areas where they only want us to check. The average person has lived in 2.5 counties in the past 7 years, so realistically you're only looking, there may be some that jump around in 10. They've lived in 10 counties, so you have to do 10 individual searches, and that can get expensive. But if you're averaging it out, the average person has lived in 2.5 counties, so it makes it a little bit easier for costing purposes. And then matching records using alternate identifiers, not just the name and address or the name and date of birth. Very few jurisdictions use Social Security numbers as identifiers, but we can find that from other things, from rental applications, from other areas where we may identify them. A lot of times we found people putting in their date of birth wrong. We match those up. So one of the things we can do is pull a driving record, because you need a birth certificate in order to get a driver's license or to get a driving record. So that has there's a very good chance that on a driving record you're going to have a right date of birth. False positives are possible, and really only fingerprint confirmation is exacting, but it kind of costs a lot of money to get that stuff done. So some of the effective non-FCRA support tools I want to go over. I talked a little bit about this, the Social Security search or person search, and that's where they search for addresses. MVR, again, validates that date of birth, and an interesting story is we had a client that came to us and said, well, you reported this record on this person, but it's not them. His date of birth doesn't match. Well, we said, well, we were a little bit suspicious, so we actually pulled a driving record on him at our cost, and his date of birth does not match your application, but his date of birth does match the driving record. So we decided to put this out. We put it in the notes, but the client didn't see that. So that's one way that we use as a tool, and you as employers can use as a tool to find correct date of birth matches. There's also, for the medical industry, the excluded parties search, the OIG sanctions, there's the terrorist watch list, the Health and Human Services database, National Sex and Violent Offenders database. I talked about the terrorist watch list, a national security database, which includes the FBI Marshals, Secret Service. There are so many different federal agencies that are prosecuting individuals that don't get into the system. They go into the federal system. And so there are databases that include this. There's also some international stuff with the Interpol and the International Banking Sanctions List, things like that that are important to look at. So some of the best practices, and this is kind of a summary slide that I want to put up here. I'm not going to go over all of them. Looks like we're running out of time, so it's about 1:45. I want to save a few minutes for some questions. But identifying the risks and things like that, reviewing only convictions. Obviously, if you're looking at arrest records, that's not really an important thing. We want to make sure they're convictions. There are some states that allow convictions, so you need to know where those are. Use an experienced company. Confirm all the conviction data from the original source. Don't just go directly from a database. Report the convictions only when the full name and they match identifiers and things like that. And also have a very savvy HR staff. The people who you have running these background checks, they need to be trained and understand things too. I wouldn't leave that up to a third party, even though you can work with third parties that are very trained on this stuff. It's important for you to have some of those things on your own, and make sure that your staff is relevant, knows about the relevant laws and understands the things that are going on. I just have a slide here that I thought was kind of interesting. Why didn't you hire that programmer? He says he has 10 years in experience in a language that just came out a year ago, and I think that's relevant. I found that cartoon. It's relevant to some of the things that we see. So that's kind of interesting and something that we should take into consideration. Again, I want to switch gears and talk specifically about the Taleo integration. And first off, I want to talk about a case study with one of our clients, which actually will help understand this. One of our clients, they're hiring about 7,500 employees plus per year, and they're a large company. And they moved to the Taleo Oracle platform, and we were using them, the integration from the background screening on their other platform. We decided to integrate the background screening platform for them, and we actually reworked their initial offer letter. We moved to the online system and integrated with their HRIS as well as the Oracle platform, and we moved some of their required releases, their drug testing letter, the pre-adverse action, and all those letters to an online solution. And what this resulted in was it decreased their hiring turnaround time from 7.28 days to 2.43 business days. And I put those points in there because we have in our system, it does it in hours. So that kind of gives you an idea of the reduction in time service of how we reduce their time. And it's a decrease of 300% actually, and actually reduced their cost by about $119,000 annually. So it really does show how these integrations with the technology can make a huge splash, not only to your bottom line, but also in some soft areas where your turnaround times are a little bit longer from the point of finding this person to the point of hire. So that's an interesting case study, and that's to the Taleo integration that we have with the background screening. As part of this integration, Peopletrail has a recruiter-centric on-demand employment screening service with the Taleo Enterprise Edition. Many of you may be on PeopleSoft, or maybe you may have the Business Edition. I'm not sure what platforms everybody is on, but we also integrate with those. But for the purposes of this presentation, I'm talking about the Taleo Enterprise Edition, the cloud service. So it is compatible with 13 point whatever and above. So anything above 13.0, we will be able to support. And basically, before the customer can use any passport service, there's a functional consultant that requests the passport service activation, and that's called an SAR. So there is a software activation request that you need to request from Taleo. And then once that's in place, we can employ those. Some of the service deployment details, you just need to let Taleo know that you're a partner. You want a partner solution with one of their partners on the employment screening side. And the passport package name is the passport slash, this is kind of a technical thing, but it's the /Peopletrail -BGC/CEC recruiting. So that's where that comes into play. And like I said, Taleo product version 13A or above. We do have a backwards compatibility expected on some of the minimum things. So if you do have that, we can actually talk, and we can get you some information on that. So the partner name for the Taleo deployments, this is also technical, but something that you can look at and something that we have available for those that are more technical or to get to your technical team. So on this, there basically is a configuration, and I'll just show some screenshots from Oracle that show that within the Oracle system that actually give you the tools. Once this is set up, you've gone through the SAR and all that, and everything's ready to go, then you can go ahead and get this set up, but the parameters need to be set as a mandatory client code. There's a mandatory username and mandatory password, because we have a single sign-on function where once you're in the system, you can pull and retrieve and order information to and from the system based on the Taleo integration. So it is critical. I just put this down at the bottom that the functional consultant requests these values from us as soon as possible so that the implementation can go through smoothly. It's again a little bit technical for some of you, but just from a service configuration standpoint, this is what it looks like within the Taleo system. These are some slides that show how that configuration works. You access the service screening list and select Peopletrail background check service basically through the Taleo service. And then the configuration on it, this is a little bit blurry slide, I think, but it kind of shows you how it requires all those things I talked about, the company ID, the username, the password, and those are all mandatory in order to function properly within our system. So, and I do have this slide available, and it's going to be copied, so that if you need to see it, then that's available to you. So again, I want to wrap up this presentation, let you know that we appreciate your time. There is a recertification credit for SHRM. If any of you are interested, email us. There is an activity ID here on the screen if you want to take that down, or you can get that later. If you don't get it by the time I go to the next slide, then you know, we can certainly email that information to you so that you can prove that you sat in on this presentation, and hopefully I didn't bore you to tears. But that's where that activation code comes on. And then also there's a recertification credit for the HR Certification Institute. This is a, what is it called? HR or HRI. And activity code down there at the bottom is what you need for that. So if you want to take that down, the 2700628. And this is where I think we can come in with some questions. And let me just quickly, I've got a couple of questions here that let me just scroll through and look at some of these that come in. So Someone asked, I've noticed there's a lot of legislation surrounding background screening and hiring. There also seems to be frequent changes and updates to this legislation on different levels, federal, state, locally. How would someone track all of these laws and know when a law, and know when that law affects them and when it actually changes, when that law changes? Okay, I think I got the question here. So that's a great question. I'm not sure how others do it, but Peopletrail has a unit in our corporate headquarters that tracks legislation across the country that might impact our business and ultimately our customers. And we respond to changes by modifying our services and procedures to ensure that we remain in compliance with all of the laws. So when a change in a federal or state mandate comes across the board, we may not report we report that information to our clients, and when any laws are imposed, then we actually get that out to our clients. So I guess one way to answer your question would be to use Peopletrail as your provider. So that's something that you could do. Just a quick example of how we've done this really quick. I was just thinking again, we provided notification to our clients back in 2013 when the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Board, became the actual regulatory agency for our industry. They actually mandated that there were 3 forms that had to be required forms that had to be implemented by January 1st of 2013. So we actually got all those forms into play. We implemented the necessary changes to all the 3 forms. We did all that on our watch. And because a lot of it was integrated with our system, we had those forms that were in question in place by November of 2012. So we were 2 months early before we deployed that. We deployed it to our customers before the January deadline. So that's just one example of how we do that and how we get those out to people. Looks like we have 5 minutes left. I'll take one. Let me just get this one other question here. So someone asked, if we are using a cloud-based service with Taleo, how do we integrate with your background screening platform or select a Peopletrail as our provider for background screening services? Again, an awesome question. I appreciate that. Thanks for asking. There is a contract embedding process or a phase for us to go through with you as a new client. But after that process is complete, so you do that, just like you would with any person, go through the legal to make sure the contracts are in place. But after that process is complete, the passport service activation request via SAR, which I talked about on my slide, I can get you more information about this, but you'll be able to actually go in and select Peopletrail directly from like a pull-down menu as your provider from the Taleo system. So that comes directly through the Taleo system. And once that's done, it's really a matter of just matching up the products that you're using and the services that you want to use, and we're pretty much ready to go. You can order and retrieve background screening into your system. So, all right, one more question here I want to take. I know we have 4 minutes left, it looks like, on the presentation, but I just wanted to get to some of these questions. This one looks like a good one. It says, you mentioned the EEOC and how they are coming down on companies increasing their claims against organizations. What do you think is the future landscape for these types of government overreach, for this type of government overreach? Again, another great question, and thanks for asking. I appreciate that. I could go on and on and on, and I'm sure you felt the passion in my story about where I talked about the EEOC coming after my client. But I could go on about how government is restricting not only our industry, but how business regulation is smothering all small to mid-sized businesses. But I don't want to get political here, and I'd say that honestly, I really feel like the future is brighter than some may anticipate. I sit on a government relations committee within my industry, and I've had the opportunity to speak with lawmakers about many of the regulatory agencies. And I also went up. I mentioned earlier in my presentation that EEOC, the head of the EEOC, came to speak. I actually went up and had a personal conversation with her, so I actually have some access to some of these people that really make a difference. And we've made some progress educating them about our industry. and we're working with them for them to recognize how they can regulate without making things so burdensome on businesses. So, you know, it really is something to look forward to, that it's a little brighter than I think we anticipate. This presentation may have sounded a little bit, you know, come down on business. Government is coming down on business. I will say litigation regarding legislation is also on the rise, but Peopletrail was a major contributor to and also a named signatory to an amicus brief for the Supreme Court case on the Spokio versus Robbins, which was a class action suit for damages under the FCRA. So it's just another example of how we're out there trying to change and make the landscape better for businesses in the future. So on that note, sorry, I'm very wordy and went on about those questions, but I think that's about all the time that we have. I'll just turn the time over quickly back to OHUG to sort of let them. Kirsten, if you're still on the line, you can go ahead and take over now and just finish up the house cleaning items on the back end of this. Thanks a lot, everybody. I appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you so much. This is a very prompt ending, which I'm sure everyone appreciates. So thank you to everyone for attending, like Wally said. Special thanks to Wally, though, today for speaking with us. It was a great presentation. So if you want to access it afterwards, it will be available on ohug.org under the education header, I participate webinars, and then view past webinars, the link on the left. Again, please fill out the evaluation as you exit, and have a great day.